For the longest time, our roles as men and women have been clearly defined. Fast forward to the 21st century, we find ourselves dealing with a new player in the space, and she's called the empowered woman. Now, the question I have is, where do I fit into that equation? How does she fit into my life? Am I still expected to be the one who provides? Is she expected to be in the kitchen? How do the two work? See, I found someone who can help me answer these questions. She is a global shapeshifter. She is an author. She's a business person. She's a speaker. But more importantly, she's the person who's going to help me answer some of these questions today. Her name is Thabang Mashigo. Welcome to another episode of Questions with Cam. Let's go inside.
Hi. Well, how are you? Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Sure.
Hi.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's my grandmother's laboratory. Hi.
They trend. Every day of our lives, you look at our phones and you're probably going to come across hashtag Black Excellence, Slay Queens, and all kinds of other things. I've got some questions and I need some answers. So I decided, let me get somebody who can give answers. She's a think tank, she's a published author, and she's an international speaker. Thabang Mashigo joins us today on Questions with KM. Girl, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
You're looking great, man.
Thank you. No,
Yeah?
I'm feeling quite good. Thanks.
Thank you for welcoming us to your home. I mean, I think we do these interviews in all kinds of places, but it's always such a beauty when you come, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, this is where I grew up. I don't really stay here, but my gran and my mom are here.
Yeah.
You know, this is where memories were built. So yeah, I'm so glad that you guys came into the space.
I actually think that's a good place for us to start.
Yeah, for
Let's
sure.
let's go there. Growing up,
For sure.
maybe paint me a picture of times back then when you were growing up here,
Sure.
and some of your most fond memories.
Yeah, well, sure. Running up and down, in this yard. My family was quite strict. I wasn't really permitted to go and play with other kids outside, which I think was good because at the time there were a lot of accidents, that were happening on the road. So usually if the neighbors' kids wanted to come and play, they'd come this side. But my biggest memories as well was just spending time with my gran, and with my mom. My mom's a caterer by profession, so she cooks a lot.
Which therefore means you must be good at cooking, but we'll talk about that.
I don't want to give myself brownie points, but yeah.
I see the pun there.
So yeah, I mean, this was the space, where I was raised. A lot of principles and values were cemented here. And I think it was, for me, my father raised me as an individual, but it's in this home where I was, raised to be a woman and certain values that should be imparted to the girl child. So in a way that gave me a great opportunity to apply them, in my teenage years and in my adulthood. So yeah, here it was a place of laughter, a place of family, and I think more than anything, I had good times, I had really good times.
Yeah.
My gran is so funny, like she cracks jokes all the time, So I had those things, and here most strangers became our family, so we just allow every single person, to come here.
So you spoke about growing up here. You spoke about a lot of the principles that were instilled in you. Obviously, that process happening here, but specifically you spoke about your identity as a woman and some of the things that we need to teach the girl child. What is that for you? So, as a woman in 2018, a professional woman, a global influencer, somebody who's really going out into the world and making her mark, paint me that story. And I'm not just talking about the professional stuff. What does it mean, holistically speaking, for you? How's that explained?
That's a profound question, KG.
I'm a profound guy.
And that's because it only hit me that I'm a woman in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to dissect that.
Please do.
For me, it was perfectly normal to get into a boardroom full of men and be chairing a meeting. For me, it was normal for men who are married to come by and ask advice about how do I handle the challenges in this institution or in this covenant? How do I, go forward? For me, it was perfectly normal to have more male friends than I do female, because we get along. And part of actually 80% of my upbringing was done by my father, because from here I moved and I stayed with him. So a lot of the values that were imparted weren't because I'm teaching you this because you are a girl. It was, I'm teaching you this because you are Thabang and I'm getting you ready for the world. So for me, my view of gender only became such a profuse reality when I saw the struggles between men and women and some of the gender conversations that are held in the diaspora. And why I say it hit me in 2018 is because in this year I was mainly affected by it, where when you would go into a certain project and you need to produce, a like either proposal or material, and you need to do it 5 times harder than somebody else who is a man, who could get it just easily. And for you, just before you can even get the contract, it's major levels of negotiation. And that's when it hit me that Thabang, your world, or rather the world, doesn't see your intelligence, they don't see your values, they don't see your skill, but they see the woman first. And that for me became very difficult to digest, because I was raised that as an individual, be self-reliant, be independent, be strong, educate yourself, armor yourself, so that you don't expect or blame anybody else for achieving the things that you do or you don't. So for me, it was a thing of, okay, so I see a person as an individual more than they are a man. And I often would say to a lot of people that even when you get married, you don't marry a wife or a husband, you marry a person. That's where it starts.
First and foremost,
because according to the world, a wife could cook, but what if Sophie is better at doing the garden and the husband is better at the cooking? Do you say that they should not come together to form a family? No. So in this day and age, more than anything, there is such a shift of identity. And I think most importantly, when it comes to the girl child, we need to raise them in values that should benefit them as an individual and make them stick out as an individual before they are as a girl or as a boy. And these are all social constructs. The fact that a girl is called a girl is a social construct. The fact that a male is called a male, it's a social construct. The fact that, girls should be wearing pink and guys blue, and there are so many other things that we can dissect. And I think, conversations around homosexuality, transgender, hermaphrodites, etc., are challenging cultural beliefs and cultural values. And for me, I think it's very important that in tradition, we're not changing it, but we need to modernize it as well. Yeah.
I think I want to come back to this idea of modernizing tradition, because it is a point that I'd like us to go to. But let me ask it frankly. Do you think the boy child, or men in particular, are threatened by the idea? And maybe the question isn't, are they threatened? Is it, do we understand what the empowered woman is? And do we know how, in your experience, do men know how to then relate to this newly empowered woman?
Powerful question. Do men know what an empowered woman is? Yes, because they were raised by one. A lot of successful men...
I need to take that one in action. That's what I need to do.
So no, they know. Absolutely, they know. No, they know. They were raised by one. If it isn't Koko, Kapa Mama, every single man has been experienced by a woman who has imparted something to him. Whether has nurtured him into being, has shaped him into being, has molded him into a warrior. But his sense of being and his defense comes from a woman. It starts from there, because he was birthed from one. I remember, case studies like your Wangari Maathai, who would speak to men and say, you are obliged to fight for land, because land is blood, and blood is the very veins that exist in us, so blood is life. If you look at also scripturally, those who are Christian or belong to any kind of religion, I'm always fascinated when the Christians discuss Moses. Moses, a seed of abandonment had to, be brought in his life. And when he was shipped, he landed into the hands of an Egyptian woman. Now, based on the social norm of Egypt, she was not supposed to love a Hebrew child. But she didn't see war. She saw peace, and she saw a son because she was barren. And so she took him in because he had to learn certain values. He had to, become illiterate, because the Jews were not allowed those things. Those were privileges. So abandonment had to creep into this child's life so that he can land in a foreign area or region where he could be raised as a king. So, although his biological mother was not there, she wasn't meant to raise him. It is the Egyptian woman that was well enough or forged enough to bring out the king out of him. So, whether you are a man who, your mother was not there, but somewhere, somehow, there is a woman that came to save you, or there is a woman that came to raise you, whether it was a social worker or your grandmother or your aunt, but there is a point of reference of a woman warrior that stepped in on behalf of, a mother figure or as a mother figure. And that's why I don't believe that not having mothers or fathers is an excuse for not achieving certain things in your life, because there's always a replacement or there's always a substitute, So men do know that. My challenge comes in with the application.
Okay.
That I think things like masculinity and femininity have made us in conflict with each other. So we see, patriarchy, where it came from. Patriarchy is a religious phenomenon. In Africa, we had matriarchy. We have queen mothers. Kolimpopo, we have Queen Mojaji. We have Batuba Babulibedu, who are currently there. We had rain queens, the Nubian queens, who would command, rain in the mountains when it was super dry. So matriarchy was the norm. We still have it in Western Africa today, where, women marry other women. It's non-sexual marriages, but they marry other women because in certain states, the female is not allowed to retain or inherit her father's land. So you need a queen mother who is deemed more wiser, more older, to be responsible over what you have been given. So those kind of things, and I think if we can begin to have conversations between male and female, woman and man, female and male, husband and wife, man as an entity that was created to exist, to develop, and to even create, to replicate and to convert things that are within and bring them out into the world so that the rest of the world can be an ecosystem that balances. If we can begin right there to have a conversation to say, you are Thabang before you are a woman, you are Jabu before you are a man, how can we both bring about resources that can make things work? Then I think we are starting somewhere.
What do you think is keeping us from doing that?
Ego.
Talk to me about that.
For me, I truly believe that ego is not a male thing. It's female.
Well, we have a lot of it.
It's a people thing. Ego is a people thing. I think if we let go of ourselves thinking that the world revolves around us and achieving certain things is about us, we can conquer a lot going forward. Right now, people do things like, for example, entrepreneurs will tell you that trade is based on two things. It's either people buy to escape pain or to experience pleasure. And based from that, I think our understanding of who we are in the world, we haven't comprehended that. It was so sad that even now, just after the death of Mama Winnie Mandela, you see how so much manipulation was cooked against her by men and by women, who stood together for her destruction. And for me, going back to how people, trade or how people buy, everything is emotion. Emotion is important, but we need to know how to use it effectively. It's the same as performance at work. If you don't tell somebody that they have done great, the next time they'll make sure that they do it bad or do it worse, because you haven't soothed their ego. So I think for me, ego is very important, but once again, we need to know and learn where to apply it. And for me, if we were to redefine what feminism is, that it's not about men being better than women or women being better than men, but it's about how do individuals thrive in their respective roles, and we haven't begun to grasp it. I mean, as a woman, naturally, you are a giver, you are a caregiver. The human anatomy or the anatomy of a female dictates different things. Yeah. Exactly my point. You incubate things. So there are women who are womb men. So you are
Wait,
a
man.
man.
You can't just breeze past that so quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
I need you to say that again because they need to hear it.
So there are women caretakers of the household, and that's fine. You know, they are wired to take care of the home. They're wired to look after the kids and to look after this man, and that's fine. You know, because we all have different toolboxes, right, to be applied in our respective projects. But then there are women who are men with wombs. I call them the womb man. And basically she is thinker but carrier. So everything she thinks she gives birth to. And these are women who run with the wolves.
Yes.
You know, I like to call them. These are the bulldozers who say, I will go where the rest of the world is scared to go. And these are women who are not intimidated. They are alpha women. Yeah. They know who they are. So any situation they are placed in, they will thrive and they will strive. You know, these are women who can equally have families but have businesses and be CEOs and still be at church, or they can still be heads in Buddhism, and so they can balance different spheres all together and hold it together, you know. And so I don't like this notion of thinking like a man and acting like a woman, because there is no such, you know. You think as you are and how you were created to be. Once again, boils back to identity. But the womb man understands the notion of creation. You know, she thinks before she moves. You know, she doesn't look at what is popular and what is conventional. She's unconventional. You know, she's the underdog, you know. I hope I'm making sense.
You know, I love this idea of this womb man. But as you're telling me that, I can't help but go back and ask myself, where then is the man? And maybe again, I'm confusing, I'm taking us back to gender when we're in a space where we're talking about the individual. But what I have found, and from my own personal experience, is that the more I have come across this woman, this empowered woman, this powerful woman, and again, I still use that reference because that is my frame of reference, right? I have found myself challenged as a man because I have not known which space to play in.
Yeah.
How do I then fit into her world, and how does she fit into my world? Because there's an archetype that I've been told makes me a man.
Sure.
That's how I've grown up.
No, absolutely.
And I've spent years reinforcing that identity and that idea. I am now introduced to women.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do I relate with her?
Absolutely.
Given the opportunity, what do you say to that man? What do you say to Katlego on how to relate with her?
Okay. I actually appreciate that question. So, if we look at colonial construction, for the colonials to come and to divide and rule or apply their principle, they used three things. So they used religion, which was Christianity and the missionaries when they came through to the colonies. And remember, religion is linked to identity. That's one. They used capitalism. Now capitalism is used to, it's linked to cheap labor. Now cheap labor, you know that you can work or exert or expedite as much effort for minimal income, which is where the notion of employment comes from. It comes from that it's a capitalist notion. Then the third that they used was commercialism or commercialization. Now commercialization is the trade of goods or the trade of commodities for a certain value. So it's the process of placing a price for a particular market. And that once again is linked to skill. It's linked to education, which are the terms that they gave them under the principle of commercialization. Now with religion, we were anchored in our identity. Now we were told that the man, in fact, in that process, the man was demasculated. And that process of demasculation took place when, you know, a family, or rather a woman, was raped by her colonial master in front of the man, which disempowered him altogether. Disempowered him emotionally, it disempowered him psychologically, because men being egocentric, you've got to do something and achieve it so that you can feel better about yourself. And that's why it is a deficit to society that most of our human capital are stuck in prisons. Because a prison is a hopeless situation. How can you move? How can you expedite? How can you be? And that's why some of them, or most of them, either resort to violence in prison, or they go into teaching and they go into cooking and they go to different activities, because something needs to pump the ego. It's a natural thing. So that's one. The identity was affected. The identity was killed. And religion for me is, I'm going to be very controversial.
Go for it.
Religion for me is one of the things that has demasculated the man. Because the moment you say the man is a head of a household but is failing to provide, then what exactly are we talking about? There's an immediate split and there's immediate conflict of interest. That's why I don't believe if a man is to say, I'm a full-time pastor, I will say that's your calling, it's not your vocation.
Yes.
So a vocation is for you to do something that will breed. It's, an income resembles your efforts. An income is it's like an output. You are remunerated for what you have put in. So in a space of the Lord, or in a space where it's a church, or in a space where, you are there to empower people spiritually, that is an obligation as a spiritual being. That's something that only you and your God have communicated. It's got nothing to do with us. So that cannot be a legacy. We can't remember you as Muruti or as a monk of some who doesn't really apply that in certain spheres, where we can see these are your talents, these are your gifts. So in a way, for me, the man was demasculated through patriarchy because, one, he can't live up to the expectations of patriarchy. Two, on the form of cheap labor. To demasculate the man, you kill an entire household. And that's why the US today will send, 500 tons of cocaine into the ghetto. And when they send it into the ghetto, it's authorized by the government. They send it to the ghetto and it's distributed. And when it's distributed into the ghetto, it's given to the drug lords. And the drug lords then make sure that there's a dissemination into, the communities, whether it's school kids, etc., etc. Then the police are on standby to take these kids back, or rather to prison. And when these kids at 18 is locked in prison, he meets a white magistrate who then gives him a 25-year sentence, which is a death sentence, but it's just in possession of drugs, 25 years. Then the boy will spend the rest of his life being parented in prison, in a cell. I remember one of my visits, there was a man who said, Sis Thabang, I don't know how I'm going to face the world because I've been in prison all my life. He was 52. And he said, the only thing I know how to hold on to is the cell, the gate of the cell. I don't know what it feels like to open a door. And so because this is the life I'm used to, I feel as though I'm going to be suffocated in the life outside because I don't know that life. So there's a lot of things that have demasculated the man, even in terms of education, where the approval of scholarships, the approval of bursaries is favored to the woman. Where even in employment, they will say, some advertisements, they will even loudly say, it is important, or we will consider female applicants first. And this is because, once again, there is no synchrony between femininity and masculinity. We have not looked at, or we have not learned to respect the fact that there are males who encounter rape as well. We have not, begun to respect that sometimes most men in corporates that are retrenching, or rather most men that are being retrenched in corporates are the main victims. We don't look at those arguments. So I don't blame the man for being lost in an empowered woman, a 21st century empowered woman, who carries her education and her skill with pride, without thinking that with this thing, how am I a relevant toolbox for this man to build what he needs to build? How can we bring forces together? Because if you see every problem as a hammer, or rather if you apply a hammer in every situation, you will only see those situations as nails. And there are some situations that need a hosepipe.
Yes.
There are others that need a spade. There are others that need a fork. So for me, it goes back to judgment, to say, if I am, Katlego, Kagiso, Sipho, and yes, I am intimidated by the 21st century woman, because she is all of these things that I am not. How do I get there? And I think it begins with saying, as Kagiso, as Sipho, what is my calling or purpose in this world, and what kind of legacy do I want to foster? And it's a legacy that should not be material. It needs to be amaterial. Because the moment you approach a woman, the first thing that you need to tell her is, where are you taking her? Or if you want to take her along. You know, what is the vision for your life? And for me, that's an important conversation. If you are Sipho Onsekodladleng, but you still say, you know what, one day I want to have a taxi association, you know, or I want to have a funeral parlor that is specific for this community, or I want to have the first African bank for the taxi industry, or I want to have something, because then you give that person something to hold on to. There's foresight. So the issue is that everything has become reduced to material, you know, and it's with women as well. And I would often say that if you want a 80% kind of man or woman, are you that 80% that you are asking for? Because you can't want a 80 if you are 50. So as an individual as well, I think the sad part that is happening in our society is that we love things and we use people. And that's where we lose it. So as either Sophie or Sipho, you know, achieve your things without using people in the process, you know. And also another thing that I think is important in closing this segment is that when you go through a personal crisis, it's personal. So our mistake is that we want to bring in a relationship or open a jar when things are still fresh, because you're looking for somebody to save you from a personal crisis. And that's a problem. And that's why you find that a guy will say, I educated her, I took her to school, and after that, she called it quits. She went with another guy. Or a woman would say, when he didn't have anything, I was there for him. You know? And now that he's got it all, he's left me. The issue, it's not them, it's you. Because you stepped in a moment of a personal crisis. That person doesn't know how it feels like to fight for bread. Or that person doesn't know to be a waiter, or to be a taxi driver, or to be a security guard, to save money and pay for their own fees, you know. So you need to make sure that when it's personal things that you are going through, go through them alone. Because the moment that person saves you, and when you are saved, you'll forget about them. You'll forget about their role in their lives. So a conversation for me in terms of, you know, addressing the ego and addressing the woman is individuality. You know, who are you, where are you going, and who's the suitable partner that is going to accompany you on this journey. Because it's not a destination, it's only a journey. And you need travelers on that journey. So who do you want to travel with? And that's also an individual question. If you say...
it's predominantly an individual question.
Yeah.
It has to start with the individual.
Yeah. Because I think our black brothers and sisters, man, we are so busy, you know, comparing, busy, kari shwashwi. You know, if you look at what Daily Sun, the newspapers, and you look at all these media platforms that are about gossip, they're not even black owned, but they're about us.
But we live in a world where, as a man, I know that I can go to said place and exhibit perhaps false indicators of wealth, but let's just call them indicators of wealth, or the ability to provide. And I will be able to attract person A, and the next day I'll go back to the same venue, you know? So it's almost, for anybody who lives in the Johannesburg space, this is the person you'd find at clubs whose name I can't mention because of, but you get where I'm going with this.
No,
yeah?
100% with you. Yeah. Okay. I was just interested in how you would define it within the parameters of, you know, now we're talking about empowerment of the woman, 21st century woman, and yet still within this 21st century woman there is the slay queen who's also empowered, but in a different kind of level,
and she owns it,
and she owns
it.
She does. Sure. Women are very intelligent and very creative, and I think when the diaspora speaks about multiple streams of income, I think a woman certainly knows how to create multiple streams.
I would have never thought about it that way, but okay.
I think we are highly creative because naturally...
That is resourceful to the last.
You know, as incubators, as nurturers, we also have the ability to think, what can we do now, you know, to make sure that the people we need to feed and the people that we need to aid or help, or the people that rely on us, don't see the struggle, right? So my opinion of slay queens, and I think I'm very careful that I don't want to politicize it and I don't want to call them they or the other, because we are women and we are women alone. So I don't like othering people. Okay. It's like saying those people, maybe transgenders or yada yada yada. My opinion of the slay queen, I think I'm running away from the point. But my opinion of the slay queen, I think this is somebody who effectively is an entrepreneur, but has not fully understood the packaging. They haven't really packaged themselves.
I'm taking it in.
Okay, let me tell you. So there are three things that are important in business. One, it's the product or service. Two, it's the packaging. And three, it's the benefits. So I think there are entrepreneurs who have misinterpreted those three things, you know.
Using that framework, talk me through it. One, what is the product? Two, we know what the packaging is. I think that's clear.
Yeah. I think the product is very, for me, okay, based on stereotype, the product is very sexual.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously a woman who has the benefit of sexual satisfaction.
Okay.
In exchange of finances. So I know a woman who was a prostitute or is a prostitute, and she owns a restaurant and some boutiques in one of the most expensive places, you know, in Gauteng.
Off the back of having been a prostitute.
Yeah, absolutely. So the remuneration that she gets from the sexual transaction.
That's such a big morality thing for me. It's a bit of a...
Yeah.
You know what? Thankfully, I can use words like mindfuck, but it is a bit of that. Purely because of this, right? That I come from the world where I was raised by hip-hop. No? I look at the likes of Jay-Z and so forth. And to get to where they got to, they had to walk a dark path too. He had to be on the street selling cocaine.
Yeah.
Ironically, right? For him to end up being the Jay-Z that he is now.
Yeah.
So, am I allowed to cast judgment on a woman who's had to do what she's had to do for her to become that person? I couldn't help but go,
Yeah, I actually like that. You know, there's a philosophical term called cultural extremism. And cultural extremism basically says that whatever culture that you belong to, the values and the principles that are inculcated and supported in that culture are right to you. So morality begs for a question of, one, who creates it, and two, according to whose standards, you know. So for example, with the Chinese, if a woman is raped by a particular man, those families believe that she should marry that particular individual. And for us, that's like, whoa, you know? But in their culture, they stand by it. So for me, I think we should not look, I think judging is the norm in our society. And I don't think women should be judged because, first of all, we don't even know the situations that they are faced with. You know, women have not had the advantage of being raised by fathers who leave an inheritance for them. Women don't have the advantage of, some of them didn't have the advantage of, you know, going to school and progressing, you know, in terms of education, because they had to raise their other siblings. They had to, you know, get jobs to do that. And men alike, you know. So the slave queen found a market, and she just knew how to package herself well for a certain benefit. It's exactly like business. You know, she's solving a problem. I think she is solving a problem, a very big problem. But personally, I think she can do better because she is more than her body. And I think also for me, the development of the slave queen is based on a culture and a stereotype that has been supported in society that women are objects. You know, that women cannot think. That woman cannot be without the man. That woman cannot survive without the man. So there's a lot of, you see how patriarchy.
It's sexuality, and that's exactly all there is to her. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's why once again we look to your Thuli Madonselas of this world, your Wangari Maathai of this world, your Oprahs of this world, your Lebu Mashile of this world, your Thandiswa Mazwai, who are thriving in what they are called for. You know, and I think for me, if you harness things that are physical, it doesn't speak about the very things that are substantive within you. And where I say it's wrong, it's in the following words. If you discount parts of you that are most important, then it's a problem. then I can say you have not found yourself. If you as a slay queen has reduced yourself to just physicality, or just your physical structure, then you haven't quite understood who you are in this world. I would often say, excuse my language, I wonder what this world would be without vaginas and penises. Would we relate and transact in the same manner?
I'd say not. I don't think so.
Be completely different.
I think we've gotten to a place where we have reduced the human experience, the relationships, to just that.
Yeah.
To penis
No,
and
we
vagina.
have. No, we have. It's all about what, once again, you love things and we use people in the process.
You know what the saddest part of that conversation though is that it has made us lonelier. Again, closest reference I can use is myself, right? I'm a 31-year-old man.
So,
And, stay.
fresh.
And living, having worked in the media industry as well and so forth, right? There's always been this hypersexualized idea around relationships with the opposite sex.
So sad.
And I found myself genuinely, and I'm going to use the word because that's what it is, and I know it's been misappropriated these days, thirsting for meaningful engagement with the opposite sex. Not to say that sexuality wasn't important, but I wanted to sit with Thabang and have conversation. And
Real
walk
conversations,
out, real
right?
conversation.
Yeah.
Walk out of it feeling like I've drank from your cup. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I've given the same in return. And I know, I can't, at least, sure, the black I'm sure there are many people like myself who are yearning for that. But because we've taken all of that away, we've just trapped ourselves in almost this glass prison of our own making, really.
Yeah.
To be honest
And
with
we
you.
have generalized men and women. The fact that, now every woman is trying to be a size 28. We are not harnessing who we are. We're not confident in ourselves. And unfortunately, confidence is a mind, spirit, and body thing.
Yes.
And it's the congruency of all three thereof,
Sexuality is not just physical.
Yeah, absolutely. We have also reduced, as you're saying, relationships to a sexual transaction. You look at, if you're a woman and you want a particular post, never mind that they're going to look at your qualifications or your skills first. They're going to look at, wow, how big is your ass, And even from the male perspective, somebody would say, but you need to see how you repay me, for me to give you this job. And that's really sad, And I think also the third thing is that, once again, the notion of marriage and the notion of relationship has been, all about not really the A material, but oh my gosh, how does she look? Can she cook? Can she, bear kids for you? Can she? So we have, our understanding of these relationships are based on very menial and very non-important things. And I'm not speaking about issues of health and taking care of yourself, but I'm really speaking about how much we've reduced relationships to say, no man, but SKG, the media industry, I think I'm going to need somebody who has some insight, in business, because I need structure in my life. And I think maybe I'm looking for, an individual who understand when I have a meeting at 12 midnight, that's really critical. She's not going to come and accuse me for 1, 2, 3. And I think it's those kind of things. And that's why it goes back to my argument of saying it's very important to look for an individual and not a female, or not a Sophie who has a Brazilian weave that is 25,000, or a Thabang who is, because she's plumpy, you just feel asexual, it's gonna be, hard. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. Exactly my point. So I think we've deviated so much from the basics.
And it's a self-awareness conversation as well, For me to know the partner I need or deserve or want, right? I need to be self-aware. I need to know that at the deepest parts of me, this is what it takes for me to be fulfilled. These are my triggers. These are my lines. These are my strengths and these are my weaknesses. Because if I'm going to go look for a partner, right? Because whether or not we want to admit it, we're looking for companionship.
No, absolutely.
Right?
And it's the most important human element ever.
But you can't be looking for gold with the wrong map, because you won't find it. You know? So I need to know.
Sure.
I need to have my map right.
Yeah.
So that when I do see it, that's it.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think we don't spend enough, and I speak specifically for men, we don't spend enough time having these conversations with self and amongst ourselves. I can tell you this for certain, that in the male relationships I've had, there's a very small group, we call it the mastermind group because of exactly that allows this level of conversation to be had. Because the conversation we're going to have is, "What up, boy? What's up? Everything at the house great?" There's that. We literally go through this itinerary, if you would, but we don't talk about those things.
Integrity,
You know what
yeah.
I mean?
Kind of like there's a gate and say no entry.
When I saw you speak for one of our mutual clients, you delivered a powerful talk on black excellence, and funny enough, that's how what this interview was supposed to be about. What I loved is how you broke it down. You started with defining both what it means to be black and what excellence is, and how then that manifests when the two come together. It was a very involved talk, but I want you to share some of that. I want you to share some of that because it was so powerful.
Okay.
How do you define black as Thabang? How should we be defining it according to you?
Sure. Thanks for that. That's actually quite a profound question, because that alone quite challenged me as well. And I think for me to even begin to have an understanding or interpretation of something, I need to know what are the hidden meanings and what are the hidden words. Before we can even define black, we need to decolonize it first. And the decolonization of black is to then remove ourselves from who we were told we are. The colonial construct, the ideologies. That's why I respect people like Mantubiko, who said, I'd rather die for ideas that will live than live for ideas that will die. One, because you as a black person, you are capable of thinking and reasoning just like your master, so-called master. The second one is where he said, our only notion and our only fight should be to pump pride into the African man's soul, because it's left empty based on the brutality that we experienced and the oppression that we experienced. So for me, we need to remove ourselves from who we were told we are. And that removal comes, in so many segments. One, to noting that firstly, we were divided so that we could be conquered. So Africa didn't have borders. In 1857, Africa was one, and that's when they placed 44 borders to divide the continent into colonies that they can each come and master. And that's why each colony has its own, a neo-imperialist currently, because it's a new form of oppression. And it would be nice as well later to dissect what is this new form of oppression that we are going through as black people. So one, is to remove ourselves from that notion, but one to say, what is black, what is African, and for me, African is creativity. African, it's not about just being with it, but it's saying everything that we create has an ability to stand in the world competitively, just like any other product that was created from any other nation. Of all the, I also shared that of all the continents that were colonized, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Africa is the only continent that is lagging behind. With Asia, people will not believe that China was actually colonized. It was under immense rule, by the colonial powers, and I'll give that pointer for people to research. But they held on to their culture, and that's what made them thrive. Holding on to their culture and to their identity, saying, we are people that, we believe this is our work ethic. We have cultural extrovertism. We don't want to look to be like anybody else. We do things our own way. If the world says 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock is the operational hours, we say 11 to 11 o'clock are the operational hours. So they did things differently, but they brought in their principles and they brought in their values into the marketplace. And I think as African people, excuse me, we haven't begun to do that. If we go back, just basic things, we go back to our communities and our kids, pride in speaking English more than our native language. It's a cultural cry. The fact that, it's easy for you to eat KFC or wings at a restaurant, but in Kuku Maihlatjwe Kaya, you can't eat that because it's animal cruelty, The fact that, our kids and generations, we have lost what it means to be us. And it's not that our parents haven't translated that, but they thought it was better, There was a research that was done that kids in rural areas actually pass more when they are taught in their native language than when they are taught in English. And that was done by Memuketi, she was the first PhD student for mathematics, first female to actually achieve that. She's now the Vice Chancellor in Cape Town University. So those kind of things. So what it means to be black is to actually embrace you. Yes, we have reduced it to say it starts with your hair, because today the American and Western diaspora makes $258 billion out of women's hair and makeup products. And guess their biggest market is Africans. And that is so sad. We have no ownership of the value chain, but we are the biggest consumers of it.
So that speaks really to understanding ourselves as black people. Then comes the question around excellence. I feel that sometimes we miss the mark in what we consider to be excellence. And I'm not talking about just black people, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
So let's create that context. And then talk about how the two meet each other.
Okay. So, for me, once you have pride in who you are and in yourself, then you will excel beyond expectation. Now, at the time I did, look at a definition around what excellence truly is. In Latin, it's accelerare, and accelerare is beyond. It's to move from one place to another. And excellence is for me is saying what has been placed for you and how can you move away from that to achieve and expedite your own understanding of what excellence is. What is your own understanding of it? Because sometimes I think we achieve based on what the world tells us to, what our families tell us to. For example, families would say, no, but you need to be an accountant, or you need to be a doctor, or you need to be... How about I be me? Because when I am myself, I can produce the best results. But if I take something that's not mine and I impersonate who I truly am or what I should be, then that's where you see lethargy coming in, frustration coming in, depression coming in, anxiety coming in, burnout coming in, because you're then trying to produce results that are not even meant to be yours. You're trying to accept opportunities that are rightfully not yours. So excellence is excellence is being in line with where you are placed, or who you are called for. For me, it goes in two directions. It's one, where people seek your counsel, you must know that's the industry that you're meant to be in, and that's where your money is. And two, when everything that you are is aligned or calls for income, or everything that you are, is aligned with your mind, your spirit, your energy, you've got a conviction, and you're so comfortable with the pain, and you're so comfortable with the struggle, that is where you're supposed to be. And you excel most with things that you love and not things that you're good at. And for me, merging the two is to say, how do I then structure a business model, or structure a project according to, here's what the world is saying about black people. So how do I prove them wrong? Or how do I then execute what is not the norm? I think it was Steve Jobs or somebody who said, crazy people make the world go round. And people don't understand that sometimes your only capital for your venture in any project or in any business is your mind and is your hands. Your mind to think and your hands to execute. So for us to start to be excellent, we've got to look at we shouldn't look at what we don't have. We need to look at what we have and how do we make the most out of it. For me, when I started in business, I remember in high school, nikirekisa discopas. And sometimes, with my pops, would buy a sack of potatoes, and I'd cut the potatoes and I'd go kirekisa koskolo, so that I could have extra income. At the time, I might have had minimal resources, but what I had was a creative mind to become an entrepreneur. And so I pushed in that segment. And people, especially people who are looking for funding, you know, in the name of being black, this whole black name carries entitlement. And all of a sudden we feel like we're entitled to benefits of the state. We are entitled to benefits of the private sector. We are entitled to grants. And it's exactly the same as how the world views Africa, that we are just a continent that requires handouts to thrive. The moment we move away from that and we actually start developing models where we can thrive without nothing and create things without nothing, it's very possible. You know, I remember with myself, as much as I wanted to be, you know, this global speaker and yada yada fish paste, I built my business without any funding. And for me, I said, I don't want this thing to link to anybody else but me. And so I would do things that I didn't like to afford things that I wanted to do. So I remember, without even having a PhD or a master's at the time, I wrote theses for those students, so for an extra income, so that I could continue to execute, create DVDs, create content that I could package and sell. You know, I didn't wait for somebody to save me or to open a door for me. So I think also merging the two between of black and excellence is to say, if there are no opportunities for us, how do we create them for ourselves? And for me, that's very important, is to say, let us take pride in whatever giftings that we've been given, because at the end of the day, it's your gift and it's your talent that is going to make room for you. It is your gift and your talent accompanied with skill that is going to generate a profit for you. It is no degree in this world that is going to make sure that you reach the destination that you need to reach, because education is the ability to master what you're called to influence. So that mastery, it could come from a degree, it could come from a magazine, it could come from a book, it could come from movies, it could, as long as you surround yourself with knowledge that could empower you to perform better, you know, in the industry that you are placed. And just 3 nuggets to be excellent. 1, you test. You got to test the product or your service. You know, you got to test what you want to bring about in society. You test it, make sure you have a sample. Once you have a sample, you apply it. And once you've applied it, after the research and the results that you've gotten, you learn how to master it. That's what being an expert is. I've got a mom who's in catering. She never went to cook school, but her first environment where she tested it before she could be trusted in the industry is she started cooking at the age of 9. And when she was cooking at the age of 9, you know, she applied it in situations where there were family gatherings and there were people and people commented, and then she became a master from it. And so it's exactly the same thing for me. How I tested, you know, my content, I made sure I started in communities. You know, I started in churches, I started in schools. And when people say, you know, as we applaud you, we also endorse, you know, what you stand for, we endorse your content. I then applied it, you know, in companies that I believed could have a buy-in in anything that I had to say. And companies would say, you know, your content, Thabang, would help us maximize profit and actually produce greater employees in terms of, you know, morale and reducing absenteeism and empowerment of some sort. And once I applied that, you know, I really mastered it. And mastered it, being a master in it was just surrounding myself with people and content that is reputable and content that is not regurgitated, but it's something that I know it's sincere and from within. I even remember a situation once where I was called to train senior managers at Mediacom, and they were all white. The hardest part was being a black woman with content. And you know, no matter how many times they tried to bash me in that room, the one thing that made me believe that I was excelling, and this is great, is that no one left the room. And that's what that's what excellence is about, is to sticking to your guns even when nobody is willing to support you through it.
But we do have to wrap it. But before we do that, let's put something into the future. If you were to speak to somebody 30, 40, 50 years from now, black child at that time, and you were to tell them who we are now, who we have been, and who we should remain, I suppose, in the future, what message would you send to them? What would you leave them with? Let's time capsule.
Sure, I like that. I think as basic and if I can be human at this point and not.
How? You haven't been human this whole time?
Well, I don't know. I think I've been challenged not to be human. I'd say no matter how many times we are led to despair, we are never crushed. And no matter how many times we are left in situations where we are perplexed, we are never forsaken. And no matter how many times the world could tell us that we are not enough and we are mediocre, prosperity will always await us because prosperity is in our blood. You shared earlier on about Mansa Musa, who was the first richest man in the world. You know, we need to know that it started with us as Africans. And what I could say, whether you are in art, you are in bidding, you are in nursing, you are in music, you are in writing, you are in rap, always stick to where your heart directs you. Because where your heart directs you, it's the only, as you said, it's the only map that will lead you to the gold. For as long as you cement it in who you are. And we talk about these things, you say, like, you need to know who you are, but how do I know? Who am I? You know, when the world has told me that I am dark, I am a slave, I am the enemy, I am odd, you know, I am not good. I mean, Sarah Batman was placed as an exhibition for people to laugh at how her body was made, but yet they don't know that it is in a woman's hips where she's able to give birth. Without the hips, she can't give birth, and that's why a lot of people who are thin or who are, you know, not in proportionate size have to go through cesareans because they don't have the capacity to carry or to give birth to a child. So we need to accentuate, you know, those things. What have we been given? And where can we apply them? You know, where can we test them so that we can master them? And in times where there's trial and tribulation, we need to know that the only way is for us to be geared towards trust. So no one can trust you until they can test you. So we need to be like eagles, and every storm that comes our way as black men and as black women, we need to look at those storms and use the pressure of the storm to soar to the highest altitude, not our wings. Because sometimes we rely so much on what we know and nothing towards what is ahead of us.
So here's the thing with interviews and conversations like this. As the interviewer, you are hoping that you're going to come out of it with some sort of conclusion, right? A nice way to wrap up the segment. That's what we call it. But looking back on my conversation with Thabang, I know that this is a conversation that doesn't end here. Here's some truths. Our relationship between men and women is always going to be evolving. How we relate to each other is always going to be changing. How we define our roles in that relation, in that dance, comes down to us. We should start asking some questions, looking for some answers on how we continue down that journey. Because here's another truth. Irrespective of what the nature of that relationship is going to be, we're going to have to share some things. We're going to have to share embraces, conversations, office spaces. We're going to have to share beds. And if we're not talking, that experience could be a very difficult one. This has been another insightful, very richly insightful episode of Questions with KM. Thank you very much to my guest, Thabang. And until the next time we see each other, be kind. My name is Katlego Mabusela. Cheers.